all three of our NPCs have their own dialogue now, which is great. However, there are a couple more things we need to do to make the text box make sense. First, when a text box is up, the player shouldn't be able to move around. Second, the text box should disappear when the player presses the spacebar again. Let's look at that first option. We've already done something like this before. Before with the player, we used a variable, hasGreeted, to make sure that they would only say hello once when nearby an NPC. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to create a variable that doesn't allow the player to move once a text box is up. To do this, let's open up our control object, which is obj_control. And we're going to add a new special event. We'll click Add Event, we'll go to Other, and we'll call this Game Start. Now, this event, as you might imagine, runs when the game first starts. So we're going to put all of our really important game variables in here. We'll just give this a quick description. And I'm just going to add a new code block. And we're going to add a new variable. However, there's a twist. I'm typing global.playerControl equals true. So what's going on here? Well, player control is just a variable, but by adding global dot before it, this becomes a global variable, which means any instance in the game can check and write to this variable. When you have a variable without a global prefix, it means it's a variable just for that instance alone. But when it's global, anything can access it. So this will be really helpful as we continue making our game. With this done, let's open up our player object. We can apply the same technique for checking movement and making sure the player is not moving when they're not supposed to. So make sure you have the player object open and make sure you're in its step event. I'm just going to make this full screen so I can see. And go to the top of the event to the check keys for movement code block. We're going to make some additions here. So I'm going to add a new if statement here. I'm going to make a new line and type if global.playerControl is true. So if I have control over my player, create a curly brace, opening curly brace, go down here, add a closing curly brace, and I'll just indent these. So now we can only move right, left, up, or down if we have control of our player, which makes sense. Let's go down here, add a new line, and type in if global.playerControl equals false. We'll make an open curly brace and a closing curly brace. And now what we're going to do is reset all four of these variables here. So move right will be 0. Move left will be 0. Move up will be 0. Move down will be 0. So if we're taking control away from the player by setting this global variable, then we'll just automatically make sure you can no longer move in any of the four directions. Now, let's go to the player object's key press space event. That's the one that we use to create our text box. We're just going to make one simple addition here. We have this line that says, if nearby NPC, right? If we're actually near an NPC. Well, you know what? Remember, we can add in multiple checks on a single line within an if statement. So let's put in a space, add in 2 ampersands, which means and let's also check for that new global variable. So global.playerControl equals true. So now we're checking if we're nearby an NPC and if we actually have control of our player. If both things are true, then we can go ahead and make a text box. Finally, let's open up our text box object and go to its create event. And let's make a new line. And we are going to say global.playerControl equals false. So remember, a global variable can be accessed and written to by any instance in the game. So when the text box opens, it will reset this variable and make it false, which means, according to the step event in our player object, once it's false, we will no longer be able to move once a text box is up. So we've solved that problem, and in fact, let's run the game now to see. So let's head over to the teacher, and I'll press space. Okay, we've got our text box, and we can no longer move when the text box is up, which is precisely what we want. However, now we have to get control back. We're going to do that in the next step, so you can go ahead and close the game window and return to GameMaker Studio 2.